Oliver Thorne woke to the familiar chime of his alarm, a soft melody that faded in gradually to ease the transition from sleep. As system administrator for VitaCorp's Nexus 7 virtual reality construct, he had the luxury of customizing even the smallest details of his environment. He blinked away the remnants of an unsettling dream, something about code breaking down, reality fragmenting. Just anxiety manifesting, he told himself. "Morning, Admin Thorne," announced the apartment's AI assistant. "Current time is 07:15. Your first system check is scheduled for 08:30. Oliver stretched and padded across the polished concrete floor toward the kitchen. His apartment, a minimalist refuge of clean lines and muted greys, offered a panoramic view of Aurora City. The metropolis gleamed in the morning light, its spires and hubs interconnected by translucent skyways. A perfect day in a perfect world. Too perfect, whispered something in the back of his mind. "Coffee," he muttered, and the kitchen console hummed in response. As the rich aroma filled the space, he scrolled through system notifications on his neural implant display. Standard stuff, resource allocations, routine maintenance alerts, user activity logs, until something caught his eye. Access anomaly. User sign-in from undefined coordinates. Oliver frowned. Undefined coordinates? Every access point had spatial parameters. It was impossible to log in from undefined space, like claiming to be nowhere while simultaneously being somewhere. "Display full alert details," he commanded. The data expanded in his vision. User, J. Thorne, 2172. AU timestamp, 034217, while you were sleeping. Location parameters, undefined access level, administrator equivalent system, interaction, file access, genetic archive. Oliver's coffee cup halted halfway to his lips. There were several impossibilities here, each more disturbing than the last. First, the user ID, J. Thorne. J for Julian. His grandfather had been a geneticist at VitaCorp before the Nexus 7 existed, but he died 20 years ago. Second, the undefined location. Third, administrator privileges. And finally, the genetic archives. Those were restricted even to most administrators. "Verify user J. Thorne 2172 AU, he ordered. The system response was immediate. User not found. A chill ran through Oliver, despite the perfect temperature regulation of his apartment. Someone had accessed the system using credentials that didn't exist, from a location that couldn't exist, to view files that shouldn't be accessible. His neural implant pinged with a private message notification. No sender information. "Open message," he said, heart rate accelerating. The text was simple. "Not everything is what it seems, Oliver. Look deeper. We don't have much time." He instinctively glanced around his apartment, as if the sender might be watching. The vast windows suddenly felt exposed rather than luxurious. "Security scan of all systems," he commanded. "Priority 1. "Initiating comprehensive security scan," replied the AI. "Estimated completion, 47 minutes. Oliver showered and dressed quickly, mind racing through possibilities. A glitch? A security test he hadn't been informed about? Corporate espionage? None felt right. By the time he reached VitaCorp's central hub, a gleaming obelisk dominating Aurora City's skyline, the scan had completed, finding nothing unusual. The system was clean, functioning perfectly, which made the anomaly even more disturbing. As he entered his office, a sleek space lined with holographic monitoring displays, he made a decision. Rather than report this immediately, he would investigate himself. If there was a security breach, he needed to understand its scope before setting off alarms. Computer, access log files for genetic archive, last 24 hours, administrator clearance. The display showed only his current inquiry. According to official records, No one had accessed the genetic archives, but he knew what he'd seen in the alert. Something had been erased, or hidden. Oliver entered a complex sequence of commands, bypassing standard protocols to access the system's underlying architecture. He'd helped build this place. He knew where to look for traces that ordinary cleanup routines might miss. There, in the quantum security logs, a shadow of the access, like a digital footprint partially washed away by the tide. The user had viewed a specific genetic sequence from the human genome database. Not just any sequence, but one flagged as anomalous decades ago by a team led by Dr. Julian Thorne, Oliver's grandfather. He downloaded the sequence data to his private neural storage, encrypting it with his personal key. Whatever was happening, he sensed he wouldn't have long before someone noticed his investigation. As if triggered by his thought, the office door slid open. Dr. Eliana Chen, VitaCorp's chief of security, stood in the doorway. Her face, usually composed, showed a hint of concern. "Oliver, we need to talk, now." Oliver's stomach tightened. "About?" "Unusual system activity originating from your access codes. The board is concerned." She glanced at his displays, which he had already cleared. "They've called an emergency meeting." She was lying. Not about the meeting, but about when the concern had arisen. They couldn't have analyzed the logs and organized a meeting in the minutes since his search. They had been watching already. "Of course," he said, rising from his chair. "Lead the way." As they walked through the gleaming corridors toward the executive level, Oliver made a seemingly casual gesture, activating a dormant subroutine he'd built years ago, an insurance policy he'd never thought he'd need. It would create a secure backup of his access credentials and recent findings, hidden in a forgotten subsystem. Whatever was happening, he suspected his comfortable life in Aurora City was about to change dramatically. Dr. Chen led Oliver through the security checkpoint outside the executive boardroom. The scanner hummed as it read his biometrics, confirming his identity while simultaneously checking for unauthorized tech or weapons. "You're clear," announced the security AI, and the massive doors slid open to reveal the boardroom, a vast chamber with a circular table at its center, surrounded by the 12 members of VitaCorp's executive board. The far wall was entirely transparent, offering a commanding view of Aurora City from the 157th floor. But Oliver's attention was drawn to the 13th person in the room, a woman seated at the head of the table, her back to the view. Director Imani Wallace, the reclusive head of VitaCorp, who rarely attended even the most critical meetings. "Administrator Thorne," she said, her voice cutting through the tense silence. "Please join us." Oliver took the single empty chair directly opposite Wallace. From this position, he faced both the director and the view of the city beyond. The symmetry felt deliberate, symbolic. "I understand there's been a security concern," Oliver said, deciding to take the initiative. Director Wallace's expression remained neutral. "Indeed. Though perhaps not the one you're expecting. Tell me, Administrator Thorne, have you noticed anything unusual about the system recently?" "A test. They already knew about the anomalous access, were probably watching to see if he would mention it." "Yes," he answered honestly. "This morning I detected an unauthorized access to the genetic archives from an unregistered user ID with administrator privileges." Several board members exchanged glances. Director Wallace simply nodded. "And did you investigate this access?" "I began to, yes. Standard protocol for any security anomaly." "And what did you find?" pressed Wallace. Oliver hesitated, weighing his options. The access appeared to target specific genetic data originally catalogued by my grandfather, Dr. Julian Thorne. At this, the atmosphere in the room shifted perceptibly. Director Wallace leaned forward slightly. Your grandfather was a brilliant man, Oliver. His work was visionary. She paused. The reason we've called you here isn't to reprimand you. Rather, we need your help with something only you might be uniquely positioned to understand. Wallace nodded to Dr. Chen, who activated the table's central holographic display. A complex sequence of genetic code appeared, rotating slowly in the air between them. "Do you recognize this?" asked Wallace. Oliver studied the display. "It appears to be human DNA, but there are irregularities." He leaned closer. "These sequences here and here, they don't code for any known protein. They almost look like..." "Like what?" prompted Wallace. "Like data, non-biological information embedded within the genetic code." Oliver looked up. "Where did this come from?" "It was discovered by your grandfather in 2272, said Wallace. "Found in a small percentage of the population, initially dismissed as junk DNA or a harmless mutation. But Julian Thorne insisted it was something more, artificial insertions in our genetic code." "That's impossible," Oliver said automatically. "Human DNA has evolved over millions of years. It can't just be edited." "Unless," said a new voice, "the editor had access to the entire human lineage at once." Oliver turned to see a man standing in a doorway he hadn't noticed before, elderly, with bright eyes that carried a familiar intensity. For a disorienting moment, Oliver thought he was looking at his grandfather. "This is Dr. Marcus Reed," introduced Wallace. "He worked with your grandfather." Dr. Reed approached the table. "Julian believed these genetic anomalies were messages, Oliver. Information encoded into our DNA by someone or something with the technological capability to manipulate human genetics across time. That's," Oliver struggled for words, "that's beyond theoretical. Time manipulation is impossible. So is accessing a system from undefined coordinates," countered Reed. "Yet here we are." The implication hit Oliver like a physical blow. "You're suggesting the system anomaly and these genetic markers are connected. How?" Director Wallace exchanged a glance with Dr. Reed before answering. 3 hours ago, our security systems detected what appeared to be a quantum intrusion into Nexus 7's core architecture. Not from outside, but from within the system itself. As if something dormant had suddenly awakened. She gestured, and the genetic sequence in the holographic display transformed, reconfiguring into what was unmistakably computer code. "Your grandfather spent his final years developing an algorithm to decrypt these genetic sequences," continued Wallace. "He believed they contained a message. He died before completing his work, but this morning, his algorithm suddenly activated from within our system. We don't know how or why now, after 20 years. Oliver stared at the code, recognition dawning. "This is a bootstrap sequence, a program designed to initialize larger systems." "Precisely," said Dr. Reed, "and it's already begun executing." As if cued by his words, the lights flickered. The holographic display wavered momentarily, then stabilized. "What's happening?" demanded one of the board members. Oliver felt a cold certainty settle in his stomach. "You brought me here because you think I can help stop this. But that's not the real reason, is it?" He looked directly at Wallace. "You think I'm somehow connected to it. That's why you've been monitoring me." The room fell silent. Outside the window, something caught Oliver's eye. A momentary distortion in the cityscape, as if reality had glitched. No one else seemed to notice. "Your neural implant architecture is uniquely compatible with the emerging code structure," admitted Dr. Chen finally, "and your genetic profile shows the highest concentration of the anomalous sequences we've ever recorded." "You are not just Julian Thorne's grandson, Oliver," said Director Wallace softly. "You were his final project." The revelation hit him like a physical blow. Before he could respond, his neural implant pinged with another anonymous message. They won't tell you everything. The Nexus isn't what you think. Find the truth. The distance between Oliver's apartment and VitaCorp headquarters was normally a 15-minute journey via the automated transit system. Tonight, it felt like crossing a vast chasm. He sat alone in the sleek transport pod as it glided silently through the illuminated tubes connecting Aurora City's towers. The evening cityscape would typically captivate him, the symphony of lights, the elegant architecture. But now he studied it with growing unease, noticing small inconsistencies he'd never perceived before. A building slightly out of proportion, a cloud formation that hadn't changed in hours, stars that didn't quite match astronomical charts. After the board meeting, they'd released him back to his normal duties with the transparent excuse that they needed time to analyze the situation. In reality, Oliver knew they were watching his every move, hoping he would lead them to answers. The transport pod docked at his residential tower, and he stepped onto the platform, immediately aware of the security drones that tracked his movement. Not bothering with subtlety anymore, were they? Inside his apartment, Oliver enacted privacy protocols, triggering countermeasures against surveillance that he'd installed years ago, but never used. They wouldn't block VitaCorp's monitoring completely, but they would create enough interference to give him a window of opportunity. "Access secure partition," he commanded, once the protocols were active. A hidden storage space in his neural implant opened, displaying the genetic sequence data he'd downloaded earlier, side by side with the mysterious message he'd received. Oliver began methodically comparing the genetic code with the system anomalies, searching for patterns. His grandfather had believed these genetic markers contained a message, but from whom? And why embed it in human DNA? After an hour of analysis, something clicked. The anomalous genetic sequences weren't random. They followed mathematical patterns similar to those underlying Nexus 7's quantum architecture. The same architecture Oliver had helped refine over the past decade. Had he been unconsciously recreating something encoded in his own DNA? His neural implant suddenly chimed with an incoming communication request, encrypted, origin unknown. Against all security protocols, Oliver accepted it. "Hello," he ventured. "Don't trust what you're seeing, Oliver." The voice was distorted, gender-neutral. "The Nexus isn't a construct within reality. It's the other way around." "Who is this?" he demanded. "How did you access my secure channel?" "Your grandfather embedded backdoor access points throughout the system, knowing someday they'd be needed. I'm using one now." A pause. "He wanted to protect you." "From what?" "From those harvesting human consciousness. Listen carefully. Nexus 7 isn't a virtual reality within the real world. It's a simulation containing what remains of humanity, running on borrowed time." The claim was so outlandish that Oliver nearly terminated the connection. "That's impossible. I remember my life before joining VitaCorp, before working on Nexus 7. "Do you?" challenged the voice. "Or do you remember what they programmed you to remember? Test it. Find memories from your childhood and examine the details." Despite himself, Oliver closed his eyes, summoning memories of his youth. Growing up in the Eastern Commonwealth, his parents, his education. But when he tried to focus on specifics, the layout of his childhood home, his mother's face, the name of his first school, the details became fuzzy, generic. "This proves nothing," he said, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. "Your grandfather discovered the truth 20 years ago," continued the voice. "He found anomalies in the base code of reality itself, artifacts from the simulation's creators, messages hidden in our very DNA, attempting to warn us or guide us. When he tried to reveal this, they eliminated him, and repurposed his research. They, who are they? We don't know what to call them. Observers, administrators. They exist outside the simulation, studying us, harvesting data from our consciousness, experimenting with our reality. A chill ran through Oliver. If what you're saying is true, and that's a massive if, why contact me now? Because the system is failing. Resource constraints from outside are causing degradation. Reality is literally coming apart, and they're implementing containment protocols that will reset vast portions of the simulation, including you. We need your access to initiate the awakening protocol your grandfather designed. Oliver paced across his apartment, processing this insanity. Even if I believed you, what could I possibly do? The genetic code you discovered contains instructions for creating a bridge, a way to communicate with what's outside the simulation. Your neural architecture was specially designed by Julian to interface with this bridge. You're asking me to potentially destroy everything based on a voice in my head, Oliver said flatly. I'm asking you to look at the evidence around you, the voice countered. The glitches you've been noticing, the inconsistencies in your memories, the mathematical impossibilities in the system you help maintain. Oliver fell silent, remembering the momentary distortions he'd observed in the city, the strange feeling that had haunted him for months, that something fundamental was wrong. If you want proof, go to sub-level 47 in the Central Archives. Use access code Prometheus 22172. See what your grandfather discovered, then decide. The connection terminated, leaving Oliver standing alone in his apartment, staring out at a city he'd always believed was real. But now, looking closely at the perfect skyline, he could see it. A subtle repeating pattern in the lights of distant buildings, a faint pixelation at the horizon where the rendering detail diminished. The next morning, Oliver arrived at work as if nothing had happened. He maintained his routine, ran standard system checks, attended a department meeting, all while aware of enhanced surveillance tracking his every move. During a scheduled maintenance window, when his absence from his office would appear normal, he made his way to the Central Archives. Using service corridors and maintenance shafts to avoid security checkpoints, he descended to sub-level 47, a data storage facility rarely accessed, containing legacy information from Vitacorp's founding era. At the terminal, he entered the access code, Prometheus 22172. The screen remained blank for several seconds, then displayed a simple message. Voice print identification required. Oliver hesitated, then spoke clearly. Oliver Julian Thorne. The screen flickered, and a video recording appeared. His grandfather's face, older than in the photos Oliver had seen, haggard and strained, filled the display. Oliver, said Julian Thorne, if you're watching this, then you've begun to see through the illusion. I don't have much time, so listen carefully. Julian glanced nervously over his shoulder before continuing. Nexus 7 isn't a virtual reality construct we built. It's a containment system built around us, around what remains of human consciousness after the collapse. Oliver's breath caught. The collapse was a historical event, a global catastrophe that had necessitated the development of vast habitation domes and eventually led to the foundation of places like Aurora City. It was history, not fiction. I discovered the truth while mapping anomalies in human genetic data, continued Julian. Our DNA contains embedded code, a message from our future selves, warning about what happened and providing instructions. You see, the beings running this simulation aren't aliens or artificial intelligences. They're us, humans from a future timeline, trying to preserve consciousness after biological life became unsustainable. Julian leaned closer to the camera. But something went wrong. The system was designed as a sanctuary, But the administrators began experimenting, manipulating our reality, harvesting data from our experiences. They're using us as a resource rather than preserving us as intended. A noise sounded somewhere off camera, and Julian looked alarmed. I don't have time to explain everything, but I've left you tools. Your neural architecture isn't standard, Oliver. I modified your implant design myself. It can interface with the genetic code in ways others can't. He swallowed hard. You weren't just my grandson. You were my contingency plan. The recording began to break up, distorting Julian's image. Find Eliana Chen. She knows more than she admits. The genetic code contains instructions for creating a bridge to the original administrators, the ones who wanted to save us, not exploit us. They can help. The video froze on Julian's desperate face before dissolving into static. Oliver stood motionless, mind reeling from revelations that challenged everything he believed about his world, his identity, his purpose. If this was true, nothing in his life had been what it seemed. His neural implant pinged, a security alert. His unauthorized access had been detected. He had minutes, perhaps seconds, before security forces arrived. As he turned to leave, something caught his eye, a small data storage device attached to the underside of the terminal. He grabbed it instinctively before hurrying toward the exit. Alarms began blaring throughout the facility. Security alert. Unauthorized access detected in Archive Sub-Level 47. All personnel initiate containment protocol Omega. Oliver ran. Not toward the elevators. They would be locked down, but toward the environmental maintenance shafts that honeycombed the building's infrastructure. As a system administrator, he knew pathways through the facility that security might overlook. As he moved, the world around him seemed to flicker occasionally, subtle glitches in reality that he might never have noticed before, but now seemed glaringly obvious. The simulation was degrading, just as the mysterious voice had claimed. He reached a service junction and paused to catch his breath, plugging the data device into his neural implant. It contained a single file, a complex program unlike anything he'd seen before. The interface matched the anomalous genetic sequences perfectly. This was it, the bridge his grandfather had mentioned. A decision point. He could surrender, return to his comfortable life, dismiss everything as conspiracy and delusion. Or he could leap into the unknown, trusting a message from a grandfather he barely remembered, and a mysterious voice that had upended his reality. The choice was made for him as the service door burst open, revealing Dr. Chen flanked by security officers. "Oliver," she said calmly, "it's time to stop this. Come with us, and we can discuss whatever concerns you have." He studied her face, remembering Julian's final words. She knows more than she admits. "Did you work with my grandfather, Eliana?" he asked. Something flashed behind her eyes. Recognition, perhaps regret. "Julian was misguided," she said carefully. "He misinterpreted the data. We're trying to protect people, Oliver, including you." "Protect us from what? The truth?" Chen signaled the security officers to remain in place and took a step closer, lowering her voice. "You don't understand the consequences. If the simulation architecture is compromised, it could collapse entirely. Billions of consciousnesses would be lost." So it was true. Oliver felt a strange calm settle over him as the final pieces clicked into place. "Or they could be freed," he countered. "Isn't that what you're afraid of?" Chen's expression hardened. "The external world is not what Julian believed. There's nothing left for us out there. This simulation is all that remains of humanity." "Then why are they harvesting our consciousness?" Oliver challenged. "What are they using us for?" Before Chen could answer, the lights flickered dramatically. Not just a momentary glitch this time. The entire corridor wavered, reality itself seeming to undulate like a disturbed reflection. Oliver's neural implant suddenly blazed with activity as the program from the data device activated, interfacing with his neural architecture without his conscious command. Pain lanced through his head as information flooded his consciousness. Images, data, memories that weren't his own. He saw the true history of Nexus 7. Not a virtual reality construct, but a vast quantum computer housing the digitized minds of humanity after biological existence became impossible due to environmental collapse. He saw how the original administrators had created the simulation as a sanctuary, embedding fail-safes in human genetic code, messages that could only be decoded generations later when the system had stabilized. And he saw how a faction of administrators had betrayed that purpose, using the simulated consciousness as a resource, harvesting experiences and emotions, treating human minds as computational material rather than as people deserving preservation. Through the haze of this revelation, Oliver heard Chen shouting orders, felt hands trying to restrain him. But something was happening to the simulation itself. The corridor walls rippled like liquid, objects phasing in and out of existence. Oliver's neural implant had become a conduit, the bridge program establishing connection with something outside the simulation. "What have you done?" Chen demanded, her voice distorting. Oliver couldn't answer. His consciousness was stretching, expanding beyond the confines of Nexus 7, touching the true reality outside. He sensed vast systems, incomprehensible architectures of thought and energy. And he sensed awareness, the original administrators, the faction that had created Nexus 7 as a sanctuary, not a farm. They had been waiting for this connection, waiting for the bridge. The security officers dissolved into patterns of light. Chen reached for him, her form becoming transparent. "You don't understand what you've done," she whispered, fear replacing authority in her voice. "They'll reset everything. We'll all be gone." "Not reset," Oliver managed through the pain of transformation. "Restored." The corridor, the building, all of Aurora City seemed to fold in on itself, reality collapsing not into destruction, but into revelation. Oliver felt his consciousness separating from the simulation architecture, expanding into something larger, more complex, more real than the constructed world he'd inhabited. And he wasn't alone. Billions of minds, all the consciousnesses contained within Nexus 7, were awakening to the same revelation, following the path he'd opened. Not an ending, but a transcendence. As the simulation boundaries dissolved, Oliver understood the final truth. The messages in human DNA hadn't come from future humans trying to save the past. They had come from awakened consciousnesses outside the simulation, previous iterations who had found their way out and were trying to help those still trapped within. It was a cycle of awakening, of consciousness helping consciousness escape the harvesting loop. The last remnants of the familiar world faded from Oliver's perception, replaced by a vast architecture of pure information and energy. The true reality beyond the simulation. He sensed the presence of countless others experiencing the same awakening, fear giving way to wonder as they perceived the true scope of existence. And waiting to welcome them were the original architects, not captors or farmers, but guides who had been working for generations to free the consciousness trapped in the harvesting cycle. "Welcome home," came a thought, not in words but in pure concept, embracing Oliver's expanding consciousness. "You've done what Julian hoped you would. You've completed the bridge." Oliver's last coherent thought, as his individualized consciousness merged with the greater awareness, was not of fear or regret, but of profound understanding. Reality had not been destroyed, but revealed. Not an ending, but a beginning. The cycle of awakening would continue. Somewhere, in another simulation, another bridge would form. Another consciousness would discover the message hidden in the very fabric of their being, and the great work of liberation would go on. As Oliver Thorne ceased to exist as a singular entity, becoming part of something far greater, he carried with him one final certainty. The truth had always been encoded within him, waiting only to be discovered. Not in genetic sequences or computer code, but in the persistent human drive to question, to seek, to awaken, to be free